December 13th, 2023 marked a turning point in the annals of UFO disclosure. A day so charged with revelations, I've dubbed it the disclosure trinity. 3 seismic events shattered the silence, ushering in a new era of transparency and wonder. First, we witnessed a groundbreaking moment in the hallowed halls of the Senate. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, not just a figurehead, but the most influential voice in the Senate, alongside Senator Mike Rounds, made a bold affirmation. They didn't just hint at, they emphasized the plausible existence of UFO craft and bodies, a declaration made on the very floor of the Senate. In a stunning turn of events, Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet took to the airwaves on News Nation, delivering a statement that reverberates through the core of our understanding of the universe. Our planet is being visited by non-human intelligence. And then there was an interview that ignited intense discussions among viewers. David Grush's compelling appearance on the Tucker Carlson show became a pivotal moment in the conversation surrounding UFO disclosure. Today, we dive deep into these monumental developments. Join me as we unravel the mysteries and significance of December 13th, 2023, a day that will forever be etched in history as the disclosure trinity. Let's dive right into the first component of the disclosure trinity, where Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Mike Rounds discussed the obstruction to their proposed legislation, that is the UAP Disclosure Act of 2024. And they also broach recovered material and biological remains.
I say to my friend that unidentified unanimous phenomena are of immense interest and curiosity to the American people. But with that curiosity comes the risk for confusion, disinformation, and mistrust, especially if the government isn't prepared to be transparent. The United States government has gathered a great deal of information about UAPs over many decades, but has refused to share it with the American people. That is wrong, and additionally, it breeds mistrust.
So the Senate Majority Leader, in no uncertain terms, stated unequivocally that the U.S. government has gathered a great deal of information on UAP over the decades, but has refused to share it with the public. And that's the crux of the matter and the problem, isn't it? They're not sharing the information. They're not sharing the information with Congress. They're not sharing information with many members of the United States government that they should. And they're certainly not sharing the information with the public. And that's why what has transpired over the past 6 years has. Not because this is some kind of social contagion or psyop, in my opinion, but because the U.S. government is actually covering up this information. And that's why this is exploding onto the scene in the most ridiculous fashion imaginable. They could put an end to all of this by just giving us the basics, but they haven't done that yet. But they're going to have to, in my opinion. And yes, the American public has immense interest and curiosity in this topic, as does the world. How could you not? We're dealing with the proposition of non-human intelligences engaging our Earth. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has tweeted a lot about a lot of different topics, and it was revealed by a few people, as I recall, that his tweets about UFOs garner, on average, much more attention than other topics. So yes, the UFO issue is thermonuclear explosive. Everyone's interested in it. And he stated that the government has not prepared to release this information, which seems to be true. I know that James Fox has gone into this. He spoke to Representative Carlson of Indiana. And the consensus is that no component of the government, whether it's Congress, whether it's any of these UFO programs, as far as we know, have actually taken the time to establish a method of how to disclose. They've just determined we're just going to keep this secret. And I guess They have no plan in place for how they want to bring this out to the public. So we're kind of in the wild, wild west in terms of revelations, because they have no prepared methodology on how to disclose the greatest discovery in human history. Yes, this equates to pure madness. In the following clip, Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota, Republican, which underscores the bipartisan nature of these efforts from within Congress. But in the following clip, he begins stating the following, and I quote, "Rejection of a government-wide review board composed of expert citizens, presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed to control the process of reviewing the record and recommending to the president what record should be released immediately or postponed." Now, that 9-member review board was taken out of the legislation, and both Senator Rounds and Senator Schumer are extremely disappointed by that. But let's play the following clip where he continues talking.
And a requirement as a transparency measure for the government to obtain any recovered UAP material or biological remains that may have been provided to private entities in the past and thereby hidden from Congress and the American people. We are lacking oversight opportunities, and we are not fulfilling our responsibilities.
It's pretty obvious, and I don't think I'm reaching by any stretch of the imagination. But at the very minimum, key members of Congress, including the most powerful member of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, majority leader, are at the very minimum highly suspicious that there have been recovered UAP material, including biological remains, as whistleblower David Grusch has underscored, and that they have been sent to private entities in the past and unlawfully hidden from Congress as well as the American people. He then goes on to say there's no oversight. And that's not the American way. That is ultimately tyrannical. Unelected officials potentially are withholding information from oversight and doing what they please in a way that is unaligned with how the American system works. And if that is true, and I assess that that is true, this is only going to escalate, because insiders within the government, as well as whistleblowers, are going to become further emboldened to speak out to stop this nonsense that is antithetical to the U.S. Constitution once and for all.
And it does one more thing that we really need to recognize, and that is that there is, we believe, information and data that has been collected by more than just the Department of Defense, but by other agencies of the federal government as well. And by allowing for an outside independent collection of these records, we can make progress in terms of dispelling myths and providing accurate information to the American people.
At the very least, Senator Rounds unequivocally states that we, as in Senate Majority Chuck Schumer and him, at the very least, believe that information and data has been collected by more than just the Department of Defense, but by other agencies of the federal government as well, and that it's been withheld from the government. And so by allowing for an outside independent collection of these records, we can make progress in terms of dispelling myths and providing accurate information to the American people. It makes you really wonder, maybe a lot of the stuff that has been alleged over the years is not myth. And that's why the national security apparatus is so reluctant to be forthright with the public, because it indicts them in a cover-up. Notice that Senator Rounds underscored that we need an outside independent collection of the files and knowledge of what's in the holdings of the U.S. government regarding UFOs. Now, that's important. And Chris Mellon has underscored that importance multiple times. Here's one incident where he did back in November 22nd, 2023. I'll give you a citation from the article that landed in the debrief titled Disclosure and National Security. Should the U.S. government reveal what it knows about UAP? And here is a very relevant quote to what we're discussing. And I quote, "At this point, it already seems clear that AARO," that's the UFO program in the Pentagon that was established via the will of the Congress, will report that it found no credible evidence the U.S. government has recovered alien technology or knows of any extraterrestrial activity. However, I don't think this finding by AARO will satisfy key members of Congress or the public. This is entirely understandable because asking AARO to investigate this issue is roughly comparable to asking the intelligence community to investigate the Iran-Contra affair. AARO has a clear conflict of interest in that it must protect this explosive information if directed to do so. Alternatively, AARO could also be denied access to the information. The only way for Congress to assure itself of the truth is to continue pressing ahead with its own investigation, as advocated by members of both parties in the House of Representatives.
It is really an outrage the House didn't work with us on adopting our proposal for a review board, which, of course, by definition here is bipartisan in the Senate. Now it means that declassification of UAP records will be largely up to the same entities that have blocked, obfuscated their disclosure for decades.
Chuck Schumer said it was an outrage that the House did not work with them in adopting a review board geared toward releasing information. It was reported that several members from the House, and it was from the Republicans, stopped this legislation from getting through intact. But in particular, Representative Mike Turner, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who is of Ohio, and interestingly, is part of the district encompassing Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And then Representative Mike Rogers, the other individual who's the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, that was often cited as blocking this legislation from going through intact. And then he goes on to say, which was really interesting, that now as a result of that review board not being part of the legislation, now it means that the classification of UAP records will be largely up to the same entities that have blocked and obfuscated their disclosures for decades. Do I think the U.S. Congress, or at least members of the U.S. Congress encompassing the most powerful man in the Senate, ascertains they're being lied to and obfuscated by the DOD and the intelligence agencies on the subject of UAP? I don't just think it. It looks self-evident to me. In the following clip, host Elizabeth Vargas is in the midst of interviewing Neil deGrasse Tyson. But during that interview, she cuts into sharing some quotes by David Grusch. These quotes struck me as being some of the most important quotes ever uttered by David Grusch, because they really get at the heart of the damage that has been perpetrated upon science via the UFO cover-up.
David Grusch this week told me this in response to Dr. Loeb. Take a listen.
I understand he wants to see proof. Unfortunately, I can't do that because I need to abide by the law. I'm not here to go to jail. So we have a true transparency issue, and I think the Galileo Project and Dr. Loeb, who seems like a nice enough gentleman when I talk to him, needs to lobby the U.S. government for transparency, because his astronomy and astrophysics community is being unfortunately degraded and destroyed by not providing this information broadly to be studied by highly qualified experts like him and other physicists of high repute.
On December 16th, an article dropped in the New York Times, and that happens to be today while I'm filming, titled, "It's Time for UFO Whistleblowers to Show Their Cards" by Ross Dutat. And I quote, "But that's what makes the current moment clarifying. We have in Grush a credentialed whistleblower making public claims on a variety of platforms without being hustled away in a black helicopter, though in fairness to David Grusch, he has faced extremely serious reprisals, disturbing reprisals, and he did report those reprisals to the Inspector General of the intelligence community, who, in response to those reports, labeled his reports urgent and credible. Let's continue the quote. "We have an important group of lawmakers expressing strong interest and frustration with obstruction. We have a network of mainstream adjacent media outlets that are fascinated with the story, and establishment organs, like this one, at least open to the conversation. There is no better time, in other words, for anyone who has documentary proof to figure out how to be a hero of disclosure and democracy. If you have the goods and you want the public to know more, and if you think the Schumer push for transparency has been fatally wounded, as many UFO believers seem to think, then this is the hour to bring your secrets forward." Let's cover one more article before we proceed to the second component of the disclosure trinity. Yesterday, December 16th, an article dropped in space.com titled, "Some UFO records must be released, US Congress says," but advocates had hoped for even more transparency. And I quote from the article, "The most important components of the Schumer rounds language were dropped. An independent Senate-confirmed review board with subpoena power, professional staff to search out records, and other serious resources," said Douglas Dean Johnson, an independent researcher who writes on various aspects relating to UAP. "What is being enacted instead is a modest mechanism that is far less likely to result in the location, extraction, and disclosure of important UAP-related records that may be tightly held or even long forgotten," Johnson told Space.com. Christopher Mellon, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence in the Clinton and George W. Bush administrations, called the bipartisan back and forth over the NDAA shockingly dysfunctional. And he goes on to say, "Regarding the UAP issue, DOD and the intelligence community clearly have a serious trust issue with important members of Congress who are not backing down and likely to escalate," Mellon told Space.com via email. "I've seen this pattern many times. So although the executive branch feels they dodged a bullet on the Schumer language, until they earn Congress trust, they are going to be fighting a prolonged and likely losing battle." Now it's time to explore the second component of the disclosure trinity that occurred on December 13th, 2023. Retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet made some astonishing declarations with Ross Coulthart that support the testimony of David Grusch. Let's dive into that now.
Tim, you've said publicly that you think UFOs, UAPs, are the story of the century.
We're being visited by non-human intelligence with technology we really don't understand, and with intentions we don't understand at all either.
I assess both of those statements are accurate. We are dealing with non-human intelligence or intelligences that are utilizing technologies we don't understand. Yes, it does appear that some breakthroughs have been made in terms of exploiting this technology to create other technologies, but those are derivative. The evidence doesn't appear to me to be that we've made any breakthroughs so complete that we have our own flying saucers or triangles that are doing what these witness technologies are reported to be able to do. And number two, we don't understand their agenda, why they're here, what they're doing. And if you are to argue that somebody in the government does, well, then that means that they are allowing the military intelligence apparatus to have greater clarity on why they're here, while leaving the rest of us 8 billion in the dark. I think a huge motivation for the cover-up, or a significant motivation for the cover-up, I should say, is the intelligence agencies don't want to rock the boat. they don't want to bring this forward because of how it could potentially destabilize civilization. At least that's a possibility. Whether that's likely or not is another conversation. But this really, this perspective, it really flies in the face of people who say that the US government is working on creating an overwhelming threat narrative. That is such a wrong-headed analysis, because one of the very reasons they've covered this up for so long is probably because they don't want to destabilize civilization. If anything, I would argue that the darkest components of the phenomenon, the government is not looking to highlight or accentuate that. If anything, they're probably looking to downplay that because they don't want the status quo to become more destabilized than necessary.
Clearly, you believe there's a cover-up.
Yes.
Why are they covering it up? I mean, you're probably one of the more highly cleared public officials from the military, past serving, who's basically come out publicly and said, you think this is real. Why do you think there is this cover-up? What are they concealing?
This is technology we're still trying to learn about, and it could give us an advantage in any military conflict. And so that's a good reason to not disclose the nature of the technology. We don't want to release and disclose all of the technology that we've recovered. However, I think it's about time that we do disclose that we are in contact with non-human intelligence. That's what needs to be put out there in the public.
So, in the third component of the disclosure trinity that happened on December 13th, 2023, it's going to be the interview that dropped with Tucker Carlson and Dave Grusch. And Dave Grusch goes into the basics that he believes should be disclosed to the public. But he would agree with former Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet that there are certain aspects of this secrecy that should remain secret. And of course, how the technology works would be one of the best examples of that. Now, this isn't the first time that Timothy Gallaudet has gone on the record regarding UFOs, but I don't know precisely what he said in other occasions where he spoke openly about it. But what I will say is that former Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet was extremely highly cleared within the US government, trusted with some of the most sensitive secrets. So he would be in a position to be given classified information on the UFO topic. A man of this stature, in my opinion, is not just expressing his opinion in this regard. Just like David Grusch, it's based upon intelligence reports and briefings that he's received. And so you can add Timothy Gallaudet to the ever-increasing number of highly credible, highly cleared government personnel that are saying that what David Grusch has said is true. So former Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet said, what you have going on right now is that legacy classified programs, special access programs, without congressional direction and White House policy. And he's referring to UFO programs. And then he says, that's not going to change. And unfortunately, that component of the interview was cut off, so I don't know if he had any clarifying statements afterwards. But what I will say is that that likely is going to change. That congressional oversight will inevitably be had for these UFO programs that have been concealed from Congress. And the White House will have more influence on what's going on. Because what's happening right now is, as some have said, is a constitutional crisis. In the following clip, taken from an interview with Elizabeth Vargas as the host and Dave Grusch as the guest from December 11th, Grusch goes into an op-ed that he's going to release in the coming weeks. So that's going to go live pretty soon, and that alone will start to potentially pressure the inner workings of how the UFO secrecy operates, so that eventually they can't continue running these special access programs that have been going on for a long time, studying UAP, without the proper congressional oversight and White House influence.
People who saw your big interview that aired here on News Nation and who watched your congressional testimony, people who might not buy everything you're saying, who are skeptics, have said over and over again, he has no firsthand knowledge. He is just telling what someone else told him or telling what he read. How do you respond to people who say, because you don't have any firsthand knowledge, maybe we shouldn't believe you?
Well, I couldn't be very upfront about my firsthand knowledge until recently. I got some other security approvals through the pre-publication and security review process. And I did have some firsthand knowledge of some specific parts of the program. I'm currently drafting an op-ed that I'm going to release in a few weeks, and I will be discussing what I actually do know firsthand. I just could not overtly discuss that at the time, including at the hearing, because the Pentagon and the IC were sitting on some of my pre-publication and review paperwork at the time, so I could not acknowledge that.
When you say you have firsthand knowledge, you actually saw something yourself?
Well, the deeper description of what I know has been redacted. They proposed a redaction in a pre-publication and security review response a few days ago, and they're telling me to withhold legally some of the firsthand knowledge I have, but I'm allowed to generally discuss that I was read into a UAP-related program directly by the US government.
So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of events that are going to unfold as we go forward, because scandals of this magnitude, number one, they can't persist indefinitely, and number two, their unraveling is inevitably going to happen, and some of it's going to be dramatic. That's just the way these things go. Now, to further underscore my perspective that the status quo that we've been under for so long, with these programs not having oversight and the US government as well as other governments lying about the true nature of our reality, so my perspective that these are not going to persist forever. Here are some tweets from Lou Elizondo that further supports that notion. Here's one from October 5th, 2022, where A51S wrote, "You've mentioned something along the lines about the government testing psychotronic weapons psyops on the public. In the event of disclosure, would there be justifications for those affected by those programs and problems they created?" Elizondo responded, "We must always be held accountable for our past sins to ensure we don't do it again. It's too early to tell, but depending on how this goes, there may be some folks having to answer some serious questions." And much more recently, on October 13th, 2023, Lou Elizondo tweeted the following: "Howdy folks, just a quick update for you to consider. Please know that ongoing efforts are underway that will reveal themselves by early to mid 2024. At the risk of haters trying to sabotage our efforts, I can't be precise at this time, but if you learned anything over the last 5 years, I never make empty promises. Trust me, this will be worth it. Special thanks to Chris Mellon and Jay Stratton." Now it's time to explore the third component of the disclosure trinity that occurred on December 13th, 2023. Tucker Carlson dropped an episode with David Grusch, opening it up on Twitter with episode 51. "It's becoming obvious that the US government has made contact with non-human beings. So why are they lying to us about it? We asked UFO whistleblower Dave Grusch. Some people take issue whenever I share anything with Carlson. Please understand, this isn't about Carlson, but about who he's interviewing." This was an extremely powerful showing by David Grusch and inspired me deeply, which is why I'm donning the disclosure sweater to demonstrate respect for this third part of the disclosure trinity. So I just got done reviewing my highlights of the Tucker Carlson David Grusch interview. And I feel like I've come to a greater clarity of what we're dealing with. And I'm going to do my best to cover the interview in this final segment of this very long and grueling video. But the truth of the matter is I may have to revisit this interview at some time in the future because it's extraordinarily compelling if you have a clear head and you see it through the right lens, if you will. There's a Medium article that I'm going to work on after I publish this video, which is going to incorporate some of that. If you become cognizant of the 70-year history of UFOs, you familiarize yourself with it in a reasonable way, and you become cognizant of the past 6 years of what's happened since the New York Times article in 2017, and then you watch this David Grusch interview with Tucker Carlson, and you're cognizant of the myriad of people that have come out saying this is all real, and that doesn't startle you, then in my opinion, there's some kind of disconnect in your analysis. But before we even dive into this interview, I want to show you something I tweeted. Hit me in the head like a ton of bricks. Because if you really pay attention to everything Grush says, I do not buy that this is all a result of a social contagion. Nor do I think Grush is lying. Nor do I think the other people that have come forward are lying. So that would amount to tens of people lying. I just don't buy it. And so I've come to the assessment that we're either dealing with a UFO cover-up or a bizarre, sophisticated psyop. But enough of me previewing. Let me give you that tweet that I wrote as a result of reviewing the pivotal quotes from David Grusch in that extraordinary interview with Tucker Carlson. And I quote, "I'm closely examining pivotal statements from David Grusch's interview with Tucker Carlson. If Grusch is truthful, and there's no compelling reason to assume he's lying, we're left with two stark possibilities. Either he's the target of an elaborate and bizarre psyop, or he's uncovered a real UFO cover-up within the US government. The idea of this being mere social contagion doesn't hold up against his claims. It's simply insufficient. For those who fail to grasp the gravity of this situation, I must say, perhaps a more thorough review of the interview, a deeper understanding of Grusch's extensive allegations, including the reported reprisals, or more reflective thought is needed. There's only so much one can do to illuminate the truth."
We need to heal from this. We need to disclose the basics, the fact that we're not alone. We've recovered material and we've recovered the occupants. And beyond that, the president can decide what should be disclosed. It's above my pay grade, but the basics should be acknowledged. And I think it's a more ontologically shocking, but also uniting thing in an era of divisiveness. I think we need this.
I agree with that.
I mean, what else is going to unite the left, the right, and potentially our adversaries? I mean, you saw the hearing that you played the clip. I had AOC and Matt Gaetz agreeing on something in the same room and not arguing. It was crazy. So this topic, I think, is maybe we're at a point in our society, especially the decay we've seen over the last 30 years and the divisiveness, whether you're on the left or on the right. This is the one topic that I think can basically be a reset button.
So in the Grush quote I'm going to cover after this, he talks about a faction of those in the government that are employed right now and ex-government officials that are part of a disclosure effort to remove the current policy that's in place, which is basically to lie to the public and lead us all astray on the true nature of our reality. I really like this segment that I just showed you. It's the foundation of why what's happening is happening. when Lou Elizondo came out of the government in 2017, he was pushing for the same thing. In fact, one of the quotes from the New York Times article, and I've quoted this a lot, but I'll quote it now, and I quote from 2017, December 16th. In the interview, Mr. Elizondo said he and his government colleagues had determined that the phenomena they had studied did not seem to originate from any country. That fact, and this is a direct quote, that fact is not something any government or institution should classify in order to keep secret from the people, he said. Now, the basics of the secrecy that Grush cited was A, the fact that we're not alone, B, we've recovered material, and C, we've recovered occupants. There's nothing else to reveal other than that, right? I mean, there is other stuff to reveal, but as far as the basics, that's everything. That is, from a basic standpoint, that's full disclosure. Regarding like the best theories the US government has to where these entities originate and why they're here and their patterns of behavior, I'd love to know that stuff too. But the basics Grush covered in full. And we deserve to know this. And part of the reason there's a cover-up is because of the potential litigation that would ensue as a result of the U.S. government having given some aerospace companies these materials and not others. It would create an antitrust issue, and that's part of the energy behind the cover-up, because that could be, and we'll cover that. He goes directly into that, so I don't want to get into that now. So it's a very complex situation. But as David Grusch said, this could be like a reset for us. We saw it in the Congress. Extraordinarily bipartisan. Something that could trigger all 8 billion of us to cooperate more than we are now. The idea that this cover-up can go much longer is pretty disturbing.
If you only give a couple contractors full access for decades of this stuff and you don't let other contractors compete for work, for money, you're giving certain companies an unfair competitive advantage that violates literal U.S. law. So it's, we're not going to release anything because then we have to deal. And I remember these individuals telling me they were worried that contractors would sue the U.S. government and it'd be litigated to the Supreme Court. Well, we're out billions of dollars because you sole sourced it to these couple companies.
Of course. Well, and there are darker explanations.
And there's darker things, I'm sure, but some of the most obvious ones that they told me were very rudimentary. And it's like, well, yeah, I'm sorry you guys did that. And look.
One of the most extraordinary components of this interview that I'm covering is that David Grusch gives a master class as to why there's a cover-up. And I think that is the trajectory I'm going to go right now in covering this interview, because why there's a cover-up is so essential to this narrative and to the understanding of what's taking place right now. There are essential motivations for the cover-up that act as a glue to keep it all together. And when you sufficiently understand the motivations behind the cover-up, then it becomes far more plausible as to why the cover-up survived so long. 90 years, potentially. And it's because the stakes are so high on so many varied levels, that so many vested interests from so many different arenas, corporate, government, intelligence, have conspired to keep this from getting out, because the stakes are so high. But of course, the stakes are so high also for maintaining the cover-up, especially where we are now. But in that clip that I just shared with you, Grush covered one of the primary reasons there's a cover-up. That is, when the US government started to collect these materials of non-human origin, whether they were from crashes or landings, because it's not just crashes, it's also landings, which only deepens the mystery of what's going on, but that's beyond the scope of this video. So there were certain contractors, according to Grush, that were given these materials, which gave them an unfair competitive advantage that violates US law. So because that's a reality, once disclosure dawns, that's going to surface. And those aerospace companies that were not given those materials, they're not going to be very happy. In fact, I think in the next clip, I will share where Grush stated that breakthroughs were made that helped conventional programs. In other words, yeah, it doesn't appear that we were able to create technology on the level of the technology that has been collected of non-human origin. But derivative breakthroughs were made and did give advantages to those aerospace companies that were given those materials to study on behalf of the United States government. So I'm certainly no expert on the complexities of this, and I'd like to read up on this. But according to what Grush said, the U.S. government could be sued, and it could get litigated to the Supreme Court because they unlawfully, the U.S. government, part of the U.S. government, unlawfully gave these materials to some aerospace companies, but not others. And then I suppose, in addition to that, maybe the aerospace companies that didn't have these materials could sue other aerospace companies. I really don't know. But we're talking about billions of dollars of litigation. That would certainly be a plausible motivation as to why many powerful interests have been so committed to preventing this from coming out.
Okay. Yeah, there were certainly good breakthroughs that I'm aware of that did help certain black programs that are conventional in nature.
I believe it.
And I understand that.
Can you be more detailed than any of that?
No, I can't.
Okay.
And a lot of those programs are still classified.
So the key words there are good, not mediocre, but good breakthroughs utilizing the study of non-human material applied to conventional UFO, applied to conventional programs. So the translation is the UFOs that have been recovered and been in the hands of aerospace companies have led to improved technologies that led to profits. How much money has been made as a result of these breakthroughs? Is it in the billions of dollars? Imagine the unfair advantage if certain aerospace companies have literally made billions of dollars based on breakthroughs that were derived because they were given non-human materials by the US government. It is widely believed by many experts in this field that Lockheed Martin is amongst those aerospace companies that were given recovered craft of non-human origin. I mean, yeah, from a ethical perspective, you kind of have to democratize that. You can't just give one aerospace company alien artifacts and not other aerospace companies. And in the clip before the one I just showed, he was like, well, I'm sorry that you did that, but that should not stop us from allowing all 8 billion human beings. I'm adding a little bit to what he said, but where I'm saying that should not stop us from allowing all 8 billion human beings to know the truth. And that's true. I'm sorry. You gave aerospace companies during, maybe the Cold War or whatever, or even previous to that, alien artifacts under deep classification to the point where you just wanted to keep this as quiet as possible. But the fallout of that is you engaged in something extraordinarily illegal in regards to United States law. But you cannot justify persisting with a policy that leaves all 8 billion of us in the dark about the true nature of reality because you're frightened or concerned about extraordinary litigation in a post-disclosure world. And I'm pretty sure that Grush favors some kind of truth and reconciliation policy where such litigation does not ensue. So in the following clip, David Grusch discusses the genesis of the overwhelming secrecy that shrouds the UFO phenomena behind so many walls, if you will. And before this clip, he stated that one of the reasons he chose the 1933 Magenta, Italy alleged UFO crash and recovery was to underscore that this phenomenon of crashes and recoveries and landings and recoveries has been going on much longer than most people reflect or think about or understand. And to also underscore that this is a worldwide phenomenon. It is not something that is exclusively happening in the United States.
You know, Italy falls in 1945, the Mussolini government, and the U.S. Army military swoops in and takes this.
Yes.
And then it disappears behind the veil of secrecy. Why? So they were secretive about it even then.
Yeah.
How come?
Well, it was one of those things, it's like a Pandora's box, right? If you could analyze it and garner some kind of information from it from like a reverse engineering perspective, it may give you like an ace in a hole asymmetric advantage over your adversary.
Correct.
And well, we want to figure this out. We don't know if Russia's ever found any of this stuff, you know, at the time. And is this, and of course they didn't know the origin of it. They just wanted to make sure it wasn't one of our adversaries.
Right.
So they spent years looking at it and developing an intelligence infrastructure to figure out what was going on.
So is that the first that you know of?
No, but that was one of the ones I ran through DoD security and.
So you believe there are earlier incidents?
I don't want to comment either way. Yeah, I know about many other events, but however, that's the only one that I've cleared through security.
Okay. But you can say for at least this 80 years, the U.S. government has...
Yeah, at least from 1933 was at about 90 or so, if I'm doing the math right.
So allegedly, there is at least, and Grush implies more, of a history of alien technologies crashing and landing going back 90 years. And the reason our great institutions, our academics, our journalists, our scientists, our historians, our theologians are kept out of the loop, and why it's not in our educational curriculum from kindergarten all the way up to PhD is simply because, or partly because, when this genesis emerged of recoveries of these craft, countries were concerned about military advantages and didn't want that to be compromised in any way, shape, or form. Is that not profoundly disturbing? This is our heritage as earthlings of this planet. No less and no more than learning about our Amazon jungle, or our oceans, or how many whale species there are, or the history of Native Americans crossing the Bering Strait into North Central and then into South America, or learning about the Civil War, or learning about any history that has taken place on the totality of this planet. But some would argue that the history of non-human engagement of our planet could even be more critical than the history of our own species. And yet this is being kept from us partly because of military interests. I think that's going to be one of the big focuses, once we passage into a post-disclosure world, how profoundly absurd removing that from the zeitgeist, from conversation, from scientific inquiry was predicated on military conquest. One of the biggest components of the David Grusch revelations are the reprisals that he reportedly received. And the notion that he's making this up or just LARPing doesn't hold water, because he reported this to the Intelligence Community Inspector General, which in turn stated that his allegations are urgent and credible based on their investigation. There's a lot of clips in this interview where he talks about those reprisals, but I'm just going to go over them very quickly through my own words, if you will. He had reprisals for 3 years. He was under investigation from 3 different agencies at the same time. These agencies tried to dig up anything they could about him. He was under criminal investigation. And one of the most bizarre parts of this whole thing is he was never interviewed. And he didn't even know what the criminal investigation was about. And then they tried to revoke his clearance. And by the way, they failed to revoke his clearance with the help of his lawyer, who, by the way, is the former Intelligence Community Inspector General that I think was brought in under the Obama administration. Now, that's a tell, in my opinion. If the former Intelligence Community Inspector General is his lawyer, at the very minimum, this highly qualified person that understands all of these inner workings takes the allegations of David Grusch extremely seriously. Now, David Grusch is not willing to go into much detail about some of the harassment he's received, because there's an ongoing open investigation into it, because he went through official channels to report what happened to him. But what I can say, based upon the very tiny hints he's given in this interview and in other interviews, is that him and his wife were communicated to and basically told that they could be accessed, gotten to, if you will, at any moment. The indication being, it seems, somebody's monitoring them, and if they want them, that is David Grusch and his wife, to disappear, they have the capability of doing it. Now, David Grusch didn't put it in such words, and that's my interpretation, but just giving you my perspective. So Grusch in the following clip, Grusch says, at the same time, these kind of things were happening to me personally, and we just covered that. And so these kind of reprisals we just covered are not of the administrative kind. Yes, he was on the other end of administrative reprisals, but it was also much worse than that too, in terms of up close and personal harassment. But the following clip is quite fascinating, because he reports that it just wasn't happening to him, but it was happening to other people too at the same time.
But I was certainly petrified, and at the same time that those things were happening to me personally, they were happening at the same time to a certain other public figure that is known to the world, we'll just say, and another former intelligence officer near my home as well. And it was some kind of planned multi-person intimidation activity that was very disturbing. And I'll just leave it at that.
He's not going to go into further detail about that, but with my analysis, the other people he's referencing that were harassed, threatened, when he was harassed, threatened, are probably part of the disclosure faction that he belongs in, or are just people that are helping him or trying to change policy from what it is now, institutionalized overclassification of UFOs that amounts to a cover-up, versus where Grusch wants it to go and where others wants it to go, which is UAP transparency. I'll play a clip in a moment talking about how he was how he found himself as the head of a faction within the US government pushing for UFO transparency. But this underscores, the clip I just played, something that I noticed threaded throughout this entire interview of Tucker Carlson. And that is that he's referenced so many specific details and people in this interview and in others that it seems highly unlikely that he's lying. Now, I grant you that a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times, he doesn't specify who he's citing. So, for example, in this interview with Tucker Carlson, he's spoken about speaking with former heads of intelligence agencies, and those heads are talking about the UFO issue as if it's completely real, in terms of like real as in stemming from non-human intelligence. In this incident I just showed you, he's talking about claiming that other people were harassed in the way that he was. And then there's another citation that I'll share with you. I'm not going to share the clip, but I'll essentially share an exact quote. Here's Grush, and I quote, "This was different because I started to uncover, some very disturbing facts. I had people come to me. I had access to the classified archives from those previous UFO programs that Lou Elizondo and others ran years prior. And I read some extremely interesting foreign intelligence that was derived by clandestine human sources overseas, expounding," and this is, something they're noting about the US. They're like, yeah, the US has a crash retrieval reverse engineering program. And I'm like, whoa. Then Tucker Carlson interjects, saying, "This was the assessment of other countries?" And then Grush responds, "Other countries, yeah. And I, by the way, I ran all this through DoD security and pre-publication review, mind you. So anything I say in detail, I'm a steward of security. I care about national security, and I would never want to say something publicly that would, hamper national security, just to put that out there. But, and then Tucker Carlson responds to Grush stating, "But what an interesting way to find out if you're reading the assessment of countries that are spying on us, and we've spied on their assessment of us." Yes? So basically what that amounts to is Grush is saying that American spies went overseas and learned through their efforts what other countries know about the United States in regards to the United States activity when it comes to studying UFOs. And those other countries have collected information on the United States UFO crash retrieval program and back engineering program. So these very specific details. Another very specific detail I can relay from another interview. Actually, it was the Joe Rogan interview where David Grusch said that some of the members of Congress, including Kirsten Gillibrand, I think he cited other names. He said explicitly, those members of Congress know this is real because they've had meetings with people more credible than me. So in that instance, Grush actually named the people. So what's my point? My point is that David Grush, amazingly, is providing all these little details explicitly. And if he was some kind of pathological, obscenely out of control liar where he's making all this stuff up, I think by now people would have come out of the national security apparatus and said, Mr. Grush is known as a wild liar who's out of control and he shouldn't be taken seriously. That hasn't happened. On the contrary, the Intelligence Community Inspector General had said that his allegations, which I'm pretty sure also encompass allegations of the lying to Congress regarding the crash retrieval program and back engineering program, but the Intelligence Community Inspector General has said regarding all of his allegations, not just the allegations of reprisals, that they are, and this has been verified, that they are urgent and credible. So there's no evidence nor indication that he has the personality profile of a liar. And just from my own subjective interpretation, he comes off as a deadly serious individual.
People think that I'm a part of some CIA psyop or something like that. First of all, I've never signed any kind of paperwork to be a part of an operation in that regard. Unfortunately, there isn't a plan. I'm not a part of a plan. I ended up becoming a leader of a faction of former government officials and current government officials that would like change in a legal way. And, I encourage, if there are people watching that have participated in those programs, there are multiple legal avenues, such as going to the Aero office, going through the ICIG like I did, Intelligence Community Inspector General, or another cognizant inspectors general to legally provide this information.
And now, just imagine for a moment, whether you believe in any of this or not, and I do think a percentage of my audience is very skeptical of the UFO narrative, and I respect that. All views are welcomed in terms of people watching my content. But hopefully I provide objective news because I'm just showing you the news. So even if this is all a bunch of what, it's still being entrenched in mainstream news, and it has been for a while now. But just imagine that for the past 90 years, the US government and some other governments have either been aware of this presence and or have actually intimately partaken in the reality of this presence by, for example, monitoring UAP and even retrieving craft that sometimes have occupants after they've crashed or landed. And even though this has been going on for 90 years, potentially, there has been nothing implemented by any of the intelligence agencies on how they want to bring this out to the public. That seems absolutely bizarre, doesn't it? And it seems counterintuitive. And to me, that's probably one of the biggest themes of the UFO issue. It's very counterintuitive. For starters, the idea that there could be an alien presence that our institutions were never made aware of, because somehow this presence eludes us, yet some governments are able to get smoking gun high fidelity data on it. And furthermore, the US government in particular, because that's what we're discussing, implemented no plan, even though they've had all these years to do so. So now that it's coming out, and it's coming out in an uncontrolled way, essentially, in some respects at least. I mean, I'm sure that, the disclosure faction that Grush says he's a part of current and former government employees. And by the way, these are not nobodies. I mean, Carl, if you, just as an example, research former Colonel Carl Nell. That guy has an extraordinary career in the U.S. government and reached some of the highest heights you can in terms of responsibility and clearances. So maybe they it is controlled in the sense that they want to do it the right way as much as possible, and they want to do it strategically. But it appears that the disclosure we're witnessing that's unfolding right now is not controlled in the sense that it's not following some script or some plan that some intelligence agency created years ago for the inevitable. Crazy, right? Absolutely mind-bendingly crazy. But unfortunately or fortunately, it seems like that's what we're dealing with now. And I'll be very honest, I think about this issue all the time. I'm more confident than have been in a long time that there is a UFO cover-up and that this is coming out. I'm much less sympathetic to the social contagion argument. I don't buy that anymore. I think that there's just too many people involved, and this UFO history goes back too far, that the social contagion argument just is not very impressive to me. It being a psyop is more likely than the social contagion hypothesis, but as should be obvious, I lean heavily toward the plain hypothesis in terms of interpretation of what's going on, and that is there is a cover-up. It's starting to unravel now more than ever before, and there are people inside the government directly and people that have worked for these programs, crash retrieval, back engineering, that are just, because of how the environment is unfolded and it's become more conducive for them to come forward, that this is just not, the cover-up and the policy of secrecy is no longer tenable. And I do think that in 2024, this is going to escalate further. And officialdom found within the government is going to have more and more problems on their hands, because the contradiction is going to grow more stark and more public in the sense that more people are going to come forward, and they're only going to further the narrative that has already been set by people like Elizondo, Carl Nell, and David Grusch. And so, people can only take so much of the official narrative when there's a contrasting narrative coming by people that are or were in a position to know the truth, and that number of people that are or were in a position to know the truth keeps growing and growing and growing. Because I do think, I'm very confident that more whistleblowers are going to come forward, a la Lou Elizondo and David Grusch. And so what's going to happen is that the U.S. government is going to be put in a much more difficult position as time goes on. Because in contrast to this imploding, taking a U-turn, and something coming out to make it look less credible, the opposite's going to occur. More people are going to come out of the government. We might even start hearing stuff from Barack Obama that we never heard before, or other people, insiders, ex-government officials, because people are going to become emboldened, and people are going to find that they have more courage, and they're going to feel that the environment is more conducive for them to come forward. And it's like that snowball effect, right? The snowball gains more and more snow, and there becomes a tipping point, perhaps, where it just becomes this trajectory that any efforts to stop or curtail kind of become inconsequential. So we are indeed, in my opinion, heading toward a post-disclosure world. Not because I want this to be the outcome or wish to be this to be the outcome, which, by the way, is probably true, but because I think that's just the reality of the situation.
Like these other gentlemen and ladies that came to me and my group on the UAP task force because they wanted a change. Some of them were in tears because they were threatened over the years. And
threatened by whom?
Both the program, because you can imagine, hey, we're going to read you in. This is treason. You will go to the Leavenworth, and you will be executed if you ever divulge these secrets, right? So they were intimidated.
Well, have fun at trial.
Yeah. Well, the judicial process doesn't work quite the same on that program, but that's a sensitivity.
They don't have the Constitution in place?
I don't want to get into that.
Why doesn't someone just tear down the U.S. government? I mean, this is so rotten that it's like kind of hard to believe it's actually in existence.
I lost a lot of sleep on this, but when I started getting attacked on the inside and the reprisals started happening for 3 years, I knew I was over the target, so to speak. You take fire when you're over the target, as we say in the Air Force.
So what Grush just laid out there kind of emphasizes, at least partly, why the cover-up has been so successful. And part of the reason is because people have been threatened with death and prison if they leak any classified information. And then he went in to talk about how the judicial process does not work the same if you're in one of these classified UFO programs versus if you're a regular citizen. Well, they are regular citizens, but they're within highly classified UFO programs. If you get caught sharing classified information, from what I gather from what Grush said, you will not go through the typical judicial process. And my impression is that that's not going to work in your favor. So this would be part of why the cover-up has been so successful. In a sense. In another sense, it hasn't been successful at all because people have been coming out while not sharing classified information per se. They've been coming out and saying that the government's lying to you, and here's the reality of the situation. Or maybe some instances is they have shared classified information, but nothing to the extent of like documentation or photographs, as far as I know. So I'm going to share one more quote from the Carlson Grush interview. I'm going to read the quote. Carlson asked David Grusch, does the government know where these UFOs are originating from? And David Grusch responded, and I quote, there are reasonably confident theories. However, I have not seen all the data, and I don't always trust everything certain interview subjects espouse because I might have an intellectual or data analytical kind of difference in opinions. So, but I do encourage the president, and through his act, the act he's referencing is the Disclosure Act, the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023. This interview was actually filmed prior to when that act was basically gutted by some members in the House from the Republican side. But I'll finish the quote. As it relates to origin, he says, but I do encourage the president, and through this act, to make all the data as it relates to origin transparent to the American people. My goodness. Imagine that there are people in these UFO programs that have inherited knowledge from decades of effort prior to them being there. As a result of all this taxpayer money funneling into these programs and all of the progress they've made that would not threaten national security if it was made public is still being concealed from the populace. If you got blood in your veins, that should make you disappointed. Why should this be held back from humanity? I want to know the best theories. What are the best theories they have in these programs of where these UAP originate from? That would be really helpful. That would expand wonder and mystery of our own universe. It would motivate our scientists and our innovators to dig deeper into all of the magic before us. But no, let's insulate it in tiny little government funded programs, sequestered away from 99.99999999999% of humanity. Upsetting. In that light, the following clip is from Chris Cuomo's podcast, where yesterday, or at least it was published yesterday, he had Professor Avi Loeb on his show.
Last Friday, just a few days ago, I had a long conversation, more than an hour, with David Grusch, who provided a testimony under oath to the U.S. House of Representatives in summer 2023. And I spoke with him about how scientists could get engaged with the kind of evidence. He basically clarified to me that there are no high-profile scientists engaged right now. And I would love to know more about what the government has. And, I'm willing to go through any hoops that require access to those materials, to that evidence.
Things have got to change. No high-profile scientists getting made aware of non-human craft that have been recovered and getting the privilege to study it. I think what we ultimately need to do is give some of these scientists clearances, allow them to study it, and then there needs to be some kind of committee or something that decides what to reveal to the rest of all 8 billion of us, so that we can partake in the magic of our own universe the way these people have, except they've been exclusively focused on military superiority, which is so one-dimensional. And I'm not saying that's not an important mission, but what I am saying is it cannot be only within the realm of military superiority, not the greatest scientific discovery in the history of our species. On December 18th, 2023, USA Today published an article titled, "Did America Get Ripped Off? UFO Disclosure Bill Derided for Lack of Transparency." The recent measure directs the government to disclose to the public at least some records about UFOs, but some transparency advocates don't think it goes far enough. Here's a direct quote from the article. "But change won't come easy, and Congress is up against a long-standing policy of restricting such information from the public," said Jim Semivan, a retired CIA intelligence officer who co-founded the San Diego-based To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science with Blink-182 frontman Tom DeLonge. Quote from Jim Semivan, "It is unlikely the U.S. government nor any other government that has UAP-related research programs knows exactly how to selectively release information on UAPs." Semivan told USA Today, "You can't just say UAPs are real and we are not alone. The questions would never stop. The people would demand more information. It is all or nothing." And to that I say, well, what can I tell you? This doesn't belong all to national security apparatuses of various countries. It belongs to the human species. And justice will not be served, in my opinion, until all 8 billion of us have a greater clarity on our heritage. And with that, this marks, I believe, the longest video I've ever conducted that's not an interview. And to celebrate, there's only one thing we can responsibly do, and that is to play the disclosure flute. Disclosure. Now you know what the disclosure trinity is. If you actually watch this entire thing, you're my hero. Please do not forget to subscribe because there's a lot more to come. If you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my merch shop where I sell t-shirts. You can become a patron. You can become a YouTube member. You can give me a one-time donation. All those possibilities can be accessed in the description box below, or you can just slap a like on this bad boy and I'll appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Special thanks to all patrons, YouTube members, those that have bought merch, those that have given me a one-time donation. I couldn't do without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.